Section 42 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dick Bourgeois Doyle. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 4. Translated by Jonathan Scott. Section 42. The Adventures of Mazin of Khorassaun, Part 3. Mazin lodged with him that night, and in the morning the sage inquired of him his situation, and the reason of his coming to such a sequestered spot. Mazin informed him, and behold, this personage was Ab al-Quddus, who, when he heard his guest mention particulars of his brother's children, redoubled his attentions to him, and said, "Did they give you any letter?" Mazin replied, "Yes." He eagerly exclaimed, "Give it to me." He gave it to him. When he opened it, read it to himself, and considered the contents word by word. Ab al-Quddus gazed earnestly at Mazin, reflected on his adventures, at which he was astonished, and how he had plunged himself into danger and difficulty in such a wild pursuit. He then said to him, "My son, my advice is that thou return by the way which thou hast come, and no longer vex thy soul on account of impossibilities, for this business thou canst not accomplish. I will write to the daughters of my brother, what shall make thee happy with them, and restore thy peace. Return then to them, and perplex not thyself farther, for between this spot and the islands of Wak al-Wak is the distance of 150 years' journey. On the way also are numerous perils, for in it are the abodes of genii, the haunts of wild beasts and monstrous serpents, and some parts also where food cannot be had or thirst be gratified. Have compassion then, my son, upon thyself, and rush not on destruction." Ab al-Quddus continued to dissuade him from his resolution during 3 days, but he would not hear advice or reproof. On the third he prepared to depart, being sufficiently refreshed, upon which the old man, seeing his steadiness, arose, kindled a fire, cast into it some perfumes, and uttered incantations to Mazin unintelligible, when suddenly appeared a genie, in stature 40 cubits. He was one of the subdued spirits of our Lord Solomon. He muttered and growled, saying, "For what, my lord, hast thou summoned me here? Shall I tear up this eminence by the roots, and hurl it beyond the mountains of Kaf?" Ab al-Quddus replied, "God be merciful to thee. I have occasion for thee, and request that thou wilt accomplish my wish in 1 day." Upon which the genie answered, "To hear is to obey." Ab al-Quddus then said to the genie, "Take up this young man, and convey him to my brother, Ab al-Sulib." He consented, though the distance was a common journey of 70 years. The genie advanced, seized Mazin, and placing him upon his shoulders, soared with him through the air from morning till sunset, when he descended before Ab al-Sulib, paid his respects, and informed him of the commands of his brother Ab al-Quddus. Upon this he greeted Mazin, who presented him the letter from the daughters of his brother, which he opened and read. When he had examined the contents, he was astonished at the circumstances which had befallen Mazin, his arrival with them, and his resolve to penetrate the islands of Wak al-Wak. He then said to him, "My son, I advise that thou vex not thyself with these difficulties and dangers, for thou canst never attain thy object, or reach these islands." Mazin now began to despair, and at the remembrance of his wife and children to weep bitterly, insomuch that he fainted, which, when Ab al-Sulib beheld, his heart sympathized with this unhappy condition. He perceived that he would not return from his pursuit, or be controlled, and therefore thought it best to assist his progress towards the islands. Going into another apartment, he kindled a fire, over which he sprinkled some perfumes and uttered incantations, when lo, 10 genii presented themselves before him, and said, "Inform us, my lord, what thou desirest, and we will bring it thee in an instant." He replied, "May God be gracious unto you," and related to them the story of Mazin, his wife, and children. When the 10 genii had heard the narration, they exclaimed, "This affair is wonderful and miraculous. However, we will take and convey him safely over the mountains and deserts to the extent of our country and dominion, and leave him there, but cannot promise further assistance, as we dare not pass a step beyond our own territories, for the land belongs to others. In it are innumerable horrors, and we dread the inhabitants." Mazin, having heard what they said, exclaimed, "I accept your offer with gratitude." The 10 genii now took up Mazin, soared with him through the air for a night and day, till they came to the limits of their territories, and then set him down in a country called the land of Kafur, took their leaves, and vanished from his sight. He walked onwards, and did not neglect to employ his tongue in prayer, beseeching from God deliverance and the attainment of his wishes. Often would he exclaim, "O God, deliverer from bondage, who canst guide in safety over mountains, who feedest the wild beasts of the forest, who decreest life and death, thou canst grant me, if thou choosest, relief from all my distress, and free me from all my sorrows." In this manner did he travel onwards during 10 days, on the last of which he beheld 3 persons contending with each other, each man trying to kill his fellow. He was astonished at their conduit, but advanced towards them. Upon his approach they desisted from combat, and one and all exclaimed, "We will be judged before this young man, and whoever contradicts his opinion shall be deemed in the wrong." To this they agreed, and coming up to Mazin, demanded from him a just arbitration in their dispute. They then displayed before him a cap, a small copper drum, and a wooden ball, saying, "We are 3 brothers, by the same father and mother, who are both received into the mercy of God, leaving behind them these articles. They are 3, and we are 3, but a dispute hath fallen out among us respecting their allotment, as each of us says, 'I will have the cap.' Our contention made us proceed to blows, but now we are desirous that thou shouldst arbitrate between us, and allot an article to each of us, as thou shalt judge best, when we will rest satisfied with thy decision. But should either contradict it, he shall be adjudged an offender." When Mazin heard the above, he was surprised, and said to himself, "These articles are so paltry, and of such trifling value, as not to be worth an arbitration. For surely this shabby cap, the drum, and the wooden ball cannot be worth altogether more than half a dinar. But I will inquire farther about them." He then said, "My brethren, wherein lies the value of these 3 things about which you are contending? For to me they appear of very little worth." They replied, "Dear uncle, each of them has a property worth treasuries of wealth, and to each of them belongs a tale so wonderful that wert thou to write it on a tablet of adamant, it would remain an example for those who will be admonished." Mazin then requested that they would relate to him the stories of the 3 articles, when they said, "The eldest brother shall first deliver the account of one, its properties, what can be gained from them, and we will not conceal anything from thee." "This cap," said the elder brother, "is called the cap of invisibility, by which whoever possesseth it may become sovereign of the world. When he puts it on, he may enter where he pleases, for none can perceive him, either genii or men, so that he may convey away whatever he chooses, unseen, in security. He may enter the cabinets of kings and statesmen, and hear all they converse upon respecting political intrigues. Does he covet wealth? He may visit the royal treasuries, and plunder them at his pleasure. Or does he wish for revenge? He can kill his enemy without being detected. In short, he may act as he pleases, without fear of discovery. Mazin now said to himself, "This cap can become nobody but me, to whom it will be most advantageous and the object of my expedition. Perhaps it may conduct me to my wife and children, and I may obtain from its possession all I wish. It is certainly one of the wonders of the world and rarities of the age, not to be found among the riches of kings of the present day." When he had ruminated thus, he said, "I am acquainted with the properties of the cap. What are those of the drum?" The second brother began, saying, "Whoever has this drum in his possession, should he be involved in a difficult situation, let him take it out of its case, and with the sticks gently beat upon the characters engraven on the copper. When, if his mind be collected and his courage firm, there will appear to him wonderful matters. The virtue of it consists in the words inscribed upon it, which were written by our Lord Solomon bin David in talismanic characters, each of which has control over certain spirits and princes of the genii, and a power that cannot be described in speech. Hence, whoever is master of this drum may become superior to all the monarchs of the present day, for on his beating it in the manner already described, when he is pressed for help, all the princes of the genii with their sons will appear, also their troops and followers, ready to obey his commands. Whatever he may order them to execute, they will perform by virtue of the talisman of our Lord Solomon bin David." When Mazin of Khorassaun had heard the above, he said to himself, "This drum is fitting only for me, as I have much more need of it than the brothers. It will protect me from all evil in the islands of Wak al Wak, should I reach them, and meet with my wife and children. It is true, if I take only the cap, I may be able to enter all places, but this drum will keep injury from me, and with it I shall be secure from all enemies." After this, he said, "I have been informed of the virtues of the cap and the properties of the drum. There now only remains the account of the wooden ball, that I may give judgment between you. Therefore, let the third brother speak." He answered, "To hear is to obey." The third brother said, "My dear uncle, whoever possesses this ball will find in it wonderful properties, for it brings distant parts near and makes near distant. It shortens long journeys and lengthens short ones. If any person wish to perform one of 200 years in 2 days, let him take it from its case, then lay it upon the ground, and mention what place he desires to go. It will instantly be in motion and rush over the earth like the blast of the stormy gale. He must then follow it till he arrives at the place desired, which he will have the power to do with ease." When the youth had conducted his description of the virtue of the wooden ball, Mazin resolved within himself to take this also from the brothers, and said, "If your wish be that I should arbitrate between you, I must first prove the virtues of these 3 articles, and afterwards let each take that which may fall to him by decision." The 3 brothers exclaimed, "We have heard, and we consent. Act as thou thinkest best, and may God protect thee in thy undertakings." Mazin then put on the cap, placed the drum under his vestband, took up the ball and placed it on the ground, when it speeded before him swiftly as the gale. He followed it till it came to the gate of a building, which it entered, and Mazin also went in with it. The brothers ran till they were fatigued and cried out, "Thou hast sufficiently tried them," but in vain, for by this time there was between him and them the distance of 10 years' journey. Mazin now rested, took the drum in his hands, rubbed his fingers over the talismanic characters, hesitated whether he should strike them with the sticks, then labored lightly upon them, when lo, a voice exclaimed, "Mazin, thou hast gained thy desires." Thou wilt not, however, continued the voice, arrive at thy object till after much trouble. But take care of the ball in this spot, for thou art at present in the land of the evil genii. Upon this, Mazin took up the ball and concealed it in his clothes, but he was overcome with astonishment at hearing words without seeing the speaker, and exclaimed, "Who art thou, my lord?" "I am," replied the voice, "one of the slaves of the characters which thou seest engraved upon the drum, and unremittingly in attendance. But the other servants will not appear except the drum be beaten loudly, when 360 chiefs will attend thy commands, each of whom has under his authority 10,000 genii, and every individual of them numerous followers." Mazin now inquired the distance of the islands of Wak-al-Wak, to which the voice replied, 3 years' journey, upon which he struck the ball before him and followed it. He next arrived in a region infested by serpents, dragons, and ravenous beasts, in the mountains of which were mines of copper. He now again tabred gently on the drum, when the voice exclaimed, "I am ready to obey thy commands." "Inform me," said Mazin, "what is the name of this country?" "It is called," answered the voice, "the land of dragons and ravenous animals." "Be careful then of thyself, and make no delay, nor regard fatigue, for these mountains are not to be passed without a chance of trouble from the inhabitants, who are genii, and in their caves are furious wild beasts." Upon this he struck the ball afresh, and followed it unceasingly, till at length he reached the seashore and perceived the islands of Wak-al-Wak at the distance, whose mountains appeared of a fiery red, like the sky gilded by the beams of the setting sun. When he beheld them, he was struck with awe and dread, but recovering, he said to himself, "Why should I be afraid? Since God has conducted me hither, he will protect me. Or if I die, I shall be relieved from my troubles, and be received into the mercy of God." He then gathered some fruits, which he ate, drank some water, and having performed his devotions, laid himself down to sleep, nor did he awake till the morning. In the morning, Mazin had recourse to his drum, which he rubbed gently, when the voice inquired his commands. "How am I," said he, "to pass this sea and enter the islands?" "That is not to be done," replied the voice, "without the assistance of a sage, who resides in a cell on yonder mountains, distant from hence a day's journey, but the ball will conduct thee there in half an hour. When you reach his abode, knock softly at the door, when he will appear and inquire whence you come and what you want. On entering, he will receive thee kindly, and desire thee to relate thy adventures from beginning to end. Conceal nothing from him, for he alone can assist thee in passing the sea." Mazin then struck the ball, and followed it till he arrived at the abode of the hermit, the gate of which he found locked. He knocked, when a voice from within said, "Who is at the gate?" "A guest," replied Mazin, upon which the sage arose and opened the door, admitted him, and entertained him kindly for a whole night and day, after which Mazin ventured to inquire how he might pass the sea. The sage replied, "What occasions thy searching after such an object?" Mazin answered, "My lord, I intend to enter the islands, and with that view have I traveled far distant from my own country." When the sage heard this, he stood up before him, took a book, opened it, and read in it to himself for some time, every now and then casting a look of astonishment upon Mazin. At length he raised his head and said, "Heavens! What troubles, disasters, and afflictions and exile have been decreed to this youth in search of his object?" Upon this Mazin exclaimed, "Wherefore, my lord, did you look at the book, and then at me so earnestly?" The sage replied, "My son, I would instruct thee how to reach the islands, since such is thy desire, but thou canst not succeed in thy desires till after much labor and inconvenience. However, at present relate to me thy adventures from first to last." Mazin rejoined, "My story, my lord, is such a surprising one, that were it engraven on tablets of adamant, it would be an example for such as would take warning." When he had related his story from beginning to end, the sage exclaimed, "God willing, thou wilt attain thy wishes." Upon which Mazin inquired concerning the sea surrounding the islands, and how he could overcome such an impediment to his progress. When the sage answered, "By God's permission, in the morning we will repair to the mountains, and I will shew thee the wonders of the seas." When God permitted morning to dawn, the hermit arose, took Mazin with him, and they ascended the mountains, till they reached a structure resembling a fortress, which they entered, and proceeded into the inmost court, in which was an immense, colossal statue of brass, hollowed into pipes, having in the midst of it a reservoir lined with marble, the work of magicians. When Mazin beheld this, he was astonished, and began to tremble with fear at the vastness of the statue, and what miraculous power it might contain. The hermit now kindled a fire, threw into it some perfumes, and muttered some unintelligible words, when suddenly dark clouds arose, from which burst out eddies of tempestuous wind, lightnings, claps of thunder, groans, and frightful noises, and in the midst of the reservoir appeared boiling waves, for it was near the ocean surrounding the islands. The hermit did not cease to utter his incantations until the hurricane and noises had subsided by his authority, for he was more powerful than any of the magicians, and had command over the rebellious genii. He now said to Mazin, "Go out and look towards the ocean surrounding the islands." Mazin repaired to the summit of the mountain, and looked towards the sea, but could not discover the smallest trace of its existence. Upon which he was astonished at the miraculous power of the hermit. He returned to him, exclaiming, "I can behold no remains of the ocean, and the islands appear joined to the mainland." When the sage said, "My son, place thy reliance on God, and pursue thy object," after which he vanished from sight. Mazin now proceeded into the islands, and did not stop till he had reached a verdant spot watered by clear rivulets, and shaded by lofty trees. It was now sunrise, and among the wonders which he beheld was a tree like the weeping willow, on which hung, by way of fruit, beautiful damsels, who exclaimed, "Praised be God, our Creator, and former of the islands of Wak al Wak." They then dropped from the tree and expired. At sight of this prodigy, his senses were confounded, and he exclaimed, "By heavens, this is miraculously surprising." When he had recovered himself, he roamed through the groves, and admired the contrivances of the Almighty till sunset, when he sat down to rest. He had not sat long, when there approached towards him a masculinely looking old woman, of disagreeable countenance, at sight of whom Mazin was alarmed. The matron, guessing that he was in fear of her, said to him, "What is thy name? What are thy wants? Art thou of this country? Inform me. Be not afraid or apprehensive, for I will request of God that I may be the means of forwarding thy wishes." On hearing these words, the heart of Mazin was encouraged, and he re-related to her his adventures from first to last. When she had heard them, she knew that he must be husband to the sister of her mistress, who was queen of the islands of Wak al Wak, and said, "Thy object is a difficult one, but I will assist thee all in my power." The old woman now conducted Mazin through by-paths to the capital of the island, and led him unperceived in the darkness of night, when the inhabitants had ceased to pass through the streets, to her own house. She then set before him refreshments, and having eaten and drunk till he was satisfied, he praised God for his arrival. When the matron informed him concerning his wife, that she had endured great troubles and afflictions since her separation, and repented sincerely of her flight. Upon hearing this, Mazin wept bitterly, and fainted with anguish. When revived by the exertions of the old woman, she comforted him by promises of speedy assistance to complete his wishes, and left him to his repose. Next morning, the old woman, desiring Mazin to wait patiently for her return, repaired to the palace, where she found the queen and her sisters in consultation concerning the wife of Mazin, and saying, "This wretch has espoused a man, by whom she has children, but now she is returned. We will put her to death after diverse tortures." Upon the entrance of the old lady they arose, saluted her with great respect, and seated her, for she had been their nurse. When she had rested a little, she said, "Were you not conversing about your unfortunate sister? But can ye reverse the decrees of God?" "Dear nurse," replied they, "no one can avoid the will of heaven, and had she wedded one of our own nature, there would have been no disgrace. But she has married a human being of Bussorah, and has children by him, so that our species will despise us, and tauntingly say, 'Your sister is a harlot.' Her death is therefore not to be avoided." The nurse rejoined, "If you put her to death, your scandal will be greater than hers, for she was wedded lawfully, and her offspring is legitimate. But I wish to see her." The eldest sister answered, "She is now confined in a subterraneous dungeon." Upon which the nurse requested permission to visit her, which was granted, and one of the sisters attended to conduct her to the prison. The nurse, on her arrival at the prison, found the wife of Mazin in great distress from the cruelty of her sisters. Her children were playing about her, but very pallid from the closeness of their confinement. On the entrance of the nurse, she stood up, made her obeisance, and began to weep, saying, "My dear nurse, I have been long in this dungeon, and know not what in the end may be my fate." The old woman kissed her cheeks and said, "My dear daughter, God will bring thee relief, perchance on this very day." When the wife of Mazin heard this, she said, "Good heavens, your words, my dear nurse, recall a gleam of comfort that last night struck across my mind from a voice which said, 'Be comforted, O wife of Mazin, for thy deliverance is near.'" Upon this the old woman replied, "Thou shalt indeed be comforted, for thy husband is at my abode, and will speedily release thee." The unfortunate prisoner, overcome with joy, fainted away, but was soon restored by the nurse's sprinkling water upon her face, and when she opened her eyes and said, "I conjure thee by heaven, my dear nurse, inform me if thou speakest truth, or dissemblest." "I not only speak truth," answered the nurse, "but by God's help thou shalt meet thy husband this day." After this she left her. The nurse, upon her return home, inquired of Mazin if he had skill to take his wife away, provided he was admitted into the dungeon at night. He replied, "Yes." When night was set in, she conducted him to the spot where she was confined, left him near the gate, and went her way. He then put on his cap of invisibility, and remained unperceived all night by anyone. Early in the morning, the queen, his wife's eldest sister, advanced, opened the gate of the prison, and entered, when he followed unseen behind her, and seated himself in a corner of the apartment. The queen went up to her sister, and beat her cruelly with a whip, while her children wept around her, till the blood appeared upon her body, when she left her hanging by her hair from a pillar, went out, and locked the door of the dungeon. Mazin now arose, unloosened his wife's hair, and pulling off the cap, appeared before her, when she exclaimed, "From whence didst thou come?" They then embraced each other, and he said, "Ah, why didst thou act thus, leave me in such affliction, and plunge thyself into such distress, which indeed thy conduct hath almost deserved?" "It is true," replied she, "but what is past, and reproach will not avail unless thou canst effect our escape." Upon which he exclaimed, "Does thy inclination really lead thee to accompany me to my own country?" She answered, "Yes, do with me what thou choosest." They remained in endearment with their children until evening, when the keeper of the dungeon approaching, Mazin put on his cap of invisibility. The keeper, having set down the provisions for the night, retired into a recess of the dungeon and fell asleep, when Mazin and his family sat down and refreshed themselves. Perceiving the keeper asleep, Mazin tried the door and found it unlocked, upon which he and his wife and children left the prison and traveled as quickly as possible all night. When the queen, in the morning, was informed of her sister's escape, she was enraged and made incantations, on which 7,000 genii attended, with whom she marched out in pursuit, resolved to cut the fugitives in pieces. Mazin, looking behind him, perceived a cloud of dust, and soon appeared the forces of his wife's sister, who cried out on seeing him with dreadful howls. "Where will ye go, ye wretches, ye accursed? Where can ye hide yourselves?" Upon this Mazin took out his drum and beat it violently, when lo, there appeared before him legions of genii, in number more than could be reckoned, and they fought with the armies of the queen, who was taken prisoner with her principal attendants. When the wife of Mazin beheld her sister in this distress, her compassion was moved towards her, and she said to her husband, "Hurt not my sister, nor use her ill, for she is my elder." Upon which he treated her respectfully, and commanded tents to be pitched for her and her court. Peace being established, the sisters took an affectionate leave, and Mazin with his family departed for the residence of Ab al-Sulib, which they speedily reached with the assistance of the genii and the directing ball. The old man received him kindly and inquired of his adventures, when he related them to him, at which he was surprised, especially at the account of the cap, the drum, and the ball, of which last Mazin begged his acceptance, being now near home, and having no farther occasion for its use. Ab al-Sulib was much pleased, and entertained him magnificently for 3 days, when Mazin, wishing to depart, the old man presented him with rich gifts, and dismissed him. Mazin was continuing his route, when suddenly a band of 100 banditti appeared, resolved to plunder and put him and his companions to death, with which design they kept advancing. Mazin called out to them, "Brother Arabs, let the covenant of God be between you and me. Keep at a distance from me." When they heard this, they increased their insolence, surrounded him, and supposed they would seize easily all that he had, but especially when they beheld his wife, and the beauty she was endowed with, they said one to another, "Let us put him to death, and not suffer him to live." Each man resolved within himself, saying, "I will seize this damsel, and not take the plunder." When Mazin saw that they were bent upon attacking him, to seize his wife and plunder his effects, he took out his drum and beat upon it in a slight manner, when behold, 10 genii appeared before him, requiring his commands. He replied, "I wish the dispersion of yonder horsemen." Upon which one of the 10 advanced among the 100 banditti, and uttered such a tremendous yell as made the mountains reverberate the sound. Immediately, as he had sent forth the yell, the banditti, in alarm, dispersed themselves among the rocks, when such as fell from their horses' backs fled on foot, so that they lost their reputation and were ridiculed among the chiefs of the Abbasidi tribes. Mazin now pursued his journey, and did not halt till he had reached the abode of Ab al-Quddus, who advanced to meet him and saluted him, but was astonished when he beheld his company and the wealth he had obtained. Mazin related what had befallen him, of dangers and hunger and thirst, his safe arrival in the islands of Wak al-Wak, the deliverance of his wife from prison, and the defeat of the army sent to oppose his return. He mentioned also the reconciliation between the sisters of his wife, and whatever had happened to him from first to last. Ab al-Quddus was greatly astonished at these adventures, and said to Mazin of Buzarah, Truly, my son, these events are most surprising and can have never occurred to any but thyself. Mazin remained 3 days to repose himself, and was treated with hospitality and respect until the 4th, when he resolved to continue his journey and took leave. He proceeded towards his own country, and did not halt on the way till he arrived with the 7 sisters, the owners of the palace, who had so much befriended him. When Mazin of Khorassaun arrived near the palace of the 7 sisters, they came out to meet him, saluted him and his wife, and conducted them within. But they were astonished at his return, and at first could scarcely believe his success, wondering that he had not perished on the road, or been torn in pieces by the wild beasts of the desert, for they regarded it as impossible that he should ever reach the islands of Wak al Wak. When they were seated, they requested him to relate to them all that had befallen him, which he did from first to last, and they were more than ever astonished at his uncommon adventures. After this they introduced a collation, and spread the cloth when they ate till they were satisfied, and then wrote a letter and dispatched it to the mother of Mazin, congratulating her on the health of her son and his safe return with his wife and children. Mazin remained with the ladies a month, enjoying himself in feasting and amusements, after which he begged permission to depart to his own country, for his heart was anxious for his mother. They dismissed him, and he traveled unceasingly till he arrived in Bussorah. He entered the city at sunset, and proceeded to his own house, when his mother came out, saluted him, and embraced him. She had erected her tomb in the court of her house, and had wept night and day till she became blind. But when the letter arrived from the sisters, from the rapture of joy her sight returned unto her again. She beheld the children of her son, embraced them, and that night was to her as an Eid or festival. When God had caused the morning to dawn, the chief personages of Bussorah visited Mazin to congratulate him on his return, and the principal ladies came to his mother and rejoiced with her on the safety of her son. At length intelligence of it reached the Caliph, Harun al-Rashid, who sent for Mazin to his presence. Having entered the audience chamber, he made the usual obeisance, and when the Caliph returned his salute and commanded him to sit. When he was seated, the Caliph demanded that he should relate the whole of what had befallen him, to which he answered, "To hear is to obey." Mazin then recited his adventures, from the time the fire worshipper who had stolen him from his mother by his stratagems, the mode of his coming to the palace of the 7 ladies, the manner in which he obtained his wife, her flight from the palace of the Empress Zobeide, his journey to the islands of Wak al Wak, also the dangers and difficulties he had encountered from first to last. The Caliph was astonished, and said, "The substance of these adventures must not be lost or concealed, but shall be recorded in writing." He then commanded an amanuensis to attend, and seated Mazin of Bussorah by him, until he had taken down his adventures from beginning to end. End of section 42.